Hello and welcome to the release webinar for version 4.5 of SquaredUp. I'm John Shaw, Chief Product Officer here at SquaredUp, and I'm joined by Adam Kinneborough, who is our VP of Customer Success. And maybe, Adam, you want to quickly introduce yourself.
Hi all, thanks again for joining us today. My name's Adam Kinneborough, VP of Customer Success here at SquaredUp. I'll be on the line answering questions along with our engineers. At the end, if you have any, we'll sort of read them out and give you some answers. Moving forward, if there are any new features that you see in version 4.5 that we could help you out with, anything really that we can help you out with, feel free to reach out to us on support@squaredup.com. But yeah, I'll jump back in at the end with some questions from the audience. Thanks, John.
All right, let's get going. So today we're going to talk you through a quick summary of the roadmap, kind of how have we got to where we've got to today. Then I'll summarize the features that are in version 4.5. It's in fact two releases we're making simultaneously. So it's SquaredUp for Azure version 4.5 and SquaredUp for SCOM version 4.5. I'll walk you through feature by feature the new capabilities in the SCOM product. And then I'll do the same thing for the Azure product. I know that many of you joining today will be customers of our SCOM product, Azure being a lot newer for us. But I'd encourage you to stay on. There's actually some really cool new stuff for Azure. So if you're in the process of moving to Azure, thinking about it, maybe something you're planning for the future, certainly worth staying on because we've got some pretty cool things that we can do now in dashboarding for Azure. Then I'll talk about how to get hold of the new version and advice on upgrading. And I've got a little teeny bit of news that might tempt some of you to stay on to the end. And then, of course, we'll wrap up with any questions that we weren't able to answer during the webinar. So roadmap, we started back in 2012. We've been adding big new versions since then. Version 4 was actually September 2018. We took a little while to get 4.1 out, and then we started to move on to a more frequent release schedule. So up to 4.3 in July. We took a little bit longer to do what was actually a very, very big release for us. So the last release was version 4.4, and that was because it was actually two products. We actually introduced SquaredUp for Azure for the first time with version 4.4, and of course SquaredUp for SCOM. A lot of cool new things there, including ServiceNow, Performance Report, and so on. And then where we are today, February for 4.5. So this is our first release following that big 4.4, the launch of SquaredUp for Azure. And again, it has taken us a little longer than our regular service, but we do plan to get a little bit more back onto a kind of a regular release cadence in future. And I'll come back at the end of the presentation and talk a little bit more about where we're going next. But let's dig into version 4.5. So first, the Azure version, then I'll summarize the SCOM version, then I'll start showing you the actual product. So the Azure version, biggest headline feature for me is the introduction of the ability to visualize log analytics. So we already had the capability to show scalar and table outputs from Azure Monitor logs, as it's now called. But we've added the ability to do donut charts and time series charts in SquaredUp for Azure version 4.5. And that gives you some amazing capabilities. There's an awful lot of stuff that's logged by default, and there's endless flexibility to log additional things into Azure Monitor logs now in Azure, so you can look at security updates, all sorts of different things. The other big headline feature for me is the introduction of cost discovery tiles. So we had in the first release the ability to take any scope, subscription, resource group, types of resources, and so on, and show you how much those things are costing you. We've now added a couple of really nice new visualizations which let you see at a glance of that total cost. What are the things that are really driving it? What are the things that make up the biggest cost? As well as those lovely tree map and sunburst, we've also got the ability to spot trends over time so that you can see time series of costs as well. So is it going up? Is it going down? And so on. And then some features that will be familiar to those of you who use the SCOM product, but that were not in our first release for Azure. So the ability to do donut visualizations of alerts and to drill down on those alerts to see the details, what's causing them to trigger. A performance heat map, so an additional visualization on performance metrics, and the ability to export dashboards to Excel. So already there in the SCOM product, but we've now added them into the Azure product as well. Finally, another thing that you could also do with the SCOM product, so by default you run a standalone installer. You can install it on any Windows machine, physical or virtual, or in the cloud. You can now do the same with SquaredUp for Azure. So in the first version, it was only available for the marketplace. The 4.5 is also available through the marketplace, but in addition, you can choose to install it separately. And that's actually really useful for situations where, for example, you have some central controls over the kind of VMs that can be stood up in the Azure environment, or controls over public IP addresses and so on. You now have the flexibility to put it onto an existing machine. It doesn't have to even be in your Azure environment, as long as it can see the internet. And finally, maybe the least glamorous of all the new introductions, but a really useful one, we've added a maintenance page in as well, which is going to show you the status of the system, logs, updates, all sorts of things. I'll come back and show you all of these things later in the presentation, but let's talk about what's new also in SquaredUp for SCOM version 4.5. Well, one thing that's exactly the same, the ability to do visualizations on log analytics. So you could already connect SquaredUp for SCOM to an Azure provider, which would read the APIs for Azure and let you pull data out of logs as well as App Insights. But now for that log capability, we've added those donut and time series tiles as well. So again, you can do those really lovely visualizations within SquaredUp for SCOM if you happen to be logging some of your stuff into Azure logs, Azure Monitor logs. So that's the same. And now you might say, well, hold on though. That's in that dark theme that is available in SquaredUp for Azure, but this is SquaredUp for SCOM, right? Well, we've also introduced dark theme for SquaredUp for SCOM in version 4.5. So if you are on an enterprise or an EAM license, you can also switch your dashboards into dark theme. And that's an example of how beautiful the VADA application discovery and analysis feature looks in dark theme. It's a thing of beauty. Another, maybe on the face of it, slightly less exciting thing, but actually really, really powerful in version 4.5. You can actually do this in the Azure and the SCOM versions, but it's our SCOM customers that in particular have been asking for this, which is the ability to pin perspectives. What that means is you can add to your navigation, your dashboard navigation, a dashboard that's actually made up of a perspective applied to a particular object. So, for example, that VADA diagram right now is only available as a perspective. You can pin it for a particular application, and what that means you can then do is share it open access, so you can put it onto a wallboard and so on. And customers who've been with us since version 3 or earlier had the ability to do that. We didn't have it until now in version 4, so this is great news for people who've not yet wanted to move to version 4 because they wanted this capability. You can now do so. And then finally, again, the maintenance page, also available in SquaredUp for SCOM. So draws attention to new versions, makes upgrades more intuitive, and makes support easier, sure for us, but more importantly for you, because you can actually from within the UI pull out logs, for example, to send to our support team so they can help you fix whatever issue it is that you're experiencing. So that's the headline capabilities in SquaredUp for SCOM. But behind the scenes, there's an awful lot of other changes we've made to address more than 50, actually very nearly 60 different bugs that we know were causing, minor irritations to up to even in some cases more significant annoyances for you. So we've taken on the challenge of every release where we're adding new features. We also want to fix as many bugs as we can in the product as well, so that the quality gets better and better with every release, and we've certainly managed to do that, in my opinion, in version 4.5. So that's enough of the summary. Why don't we actually switch to showing you the product? So we'll start with SquaredUp for SCOM version 4.5. So this is a version 4.5 that we installed yesterday, and here's the beautiful availability report. If you're using the EAM version, you can see availability of your different applications. You can drill in, as you know, and see what's going on with a particular application. But let's see how easy it is to put it into dark theme. Okay, so here we see the topology of the sales application in our beautiful VADA. If you simply go up to the menu, top right, and select this new item, personalization, you can go in and turn, by default this is off, but you can now go in and turn on dark theme. If I go back to that topology of the sales application, you'll see it regenerate again. but now in our beautiful and lovely dark theme. And that applies to all of the dashboards. They're all now available for you in dark theme. Okay, so that's dark theme in SquaredUp for SCOM. I mentioned also Azure Monitor logs. So we've added these new visualizations. I'll show you a couple of simple ones here, and I'll get into it actually a little bit more when I show you the Azure product. It works in a very similar way in the Azure product. So here's an example which is showing the status of updates. So you can see, as well as before we had the scaler showing missing updates and missing definitions, we've now got a donut chart that's showing how those break down and which computers it is that have got them. So I'll show you quickly how that's set up. So we've added a couple of new, under Azure, we've now added a couple of new visualizations. So Log Analytics Line Graph, Log Analytics Donut. So this is the donut. As before, you'll need to set up a provider out to your Azure environment. You can set up more than one. So this is set out to a particular Azure environment and workspace. You then enter your KQL query. If you're not sure about KQL, we've got a couple of nice blogs on it, but there's also plenty of good documentation, both in the Azure portal and at Microsoft.com, on how to write simple KQL queries. This is a very simple one where we're looking at the update table and seeing most recent updates and what the classification was, and there it is displayed in the donut. You can actually choose from different color palettes, so you can see in the one over to the right, we've actually used the priorities, and you can do it around health and so on. It depends on the values you're getting back. We've used a general one here because there's no value there's no sort of priority order. It's just done as values. You can pick and choose what it is that you're showing. So it's pretty cool. Similarly, you can do the same with time series. So I've done a very simple one here, which is a time series on the protection status of our computers that are running Defender over time. So here we're querying the protection status table and showing that in as a projection over time, and we can see that and render that as a time series. So nice simple visualization. So that's Log Analytics, a big new feature in SquaredUp for SCOM, and I'll come back and show you that in a little bit more in SquaredUp for Azure as well. And then I mentioned pinning perspectives. So if we go back to our sales application, let's go into the individual application. So this is the availability report again. We can then dig into particular application. My favorite app, as you can see from its status, it tends not to be very reliable, but it has a nice map here. And this map, if you know the product, is actually a perspective. So you can see this is the perspective ribbon. So this is a perspective applied to enterprise applications. And until this version, you weren't able to display this on a wallboard, but actually, display this rather open access. But you can now do so. It's a two-step process. The first thing you can do is pin it to a menu. So if I go up here, click the sharing button, I can pin this perspective as a dashboard. What that means is it's going to take the perspective applied or pinned to this particular object, in this case the sales application. And the last step so it's done that for me. The last step I need to do is to choose where to put it in my navigation. So I'm going to put it, I'll put it at the top level up here, sales app map we'll call it. Okay, so that's going to appear in my my navigation as soon as I hit pin. So there it is, sales app map appeared at the top level. So I'll publish it. And now, so that is now a dashboard rather than a perspective. So it's a perspective pinned to a particular application. Because it's a dashboard, I can now actually enable open access for that and go and share that URL, and that will be available open access for anyone, even without a sign-in to view. So that's pinned perspectives capability. And then finally, I wanted to show you the maintenance page. So if we go up here to the system menu again, you'll see that a new option has appeared, second from the right, called maintenance. And this is where we're listing things like what version of the product is running, whether there are any new updates available. We'll draw your attention to that if so. Remote administration, so you can actually quickly go in and actually access the VM that the web server is running on. You might be confused here, thinking, well, we've made a mistake because this is the SCOM product. Surely it says open in Azure portal. Well, this is because we've detected that our software is running on a VM that is hosted in Azure. And so even though it's squared up for SCOM, it happens to be running on an Azure VM. And so this is going to take you through to the Azure portal for that VM so that you can then initiate your remote session from there, or you can connect directly with RDP if you have that set up. And then the other thing that you see appearing here is logs, so you can actually view the most recent log entries. You can change from now the level of logging. So if you're sort of trying to work out what's going on with support, you can hit debug, for example, and get glorious detail. And then you can actually download the most recent log files as well, so that they're ready for you to send straight to support if you're trying to get to the bottom of a problem. So maintenance page, hopefully you will not need to use this, but you'll be very glad it's there if you do hit a glitch. So that's the big new things in SquaredUp for SCOM. If we flip back to the presentation now, and there's a couple of other things I want to mention. So, I mentioned the bugs that we've fixed. So 50 odd, I'm not going to take you through all the bugs, don't worry. But there is one that I want to mention. I talked about on our last release webinar for 4.4, the number of bugs that we'd fixed there. But I had a couple of questions coming in on this equivalent webinar saying, well, what about the one at the top of your known issues list, talking about the named user list, not synchronizing across high availability. So high availability is the feature where you can run SquaredUp on more than one server at once, but basically the same set of dashboards replicated across more than one server so that you can do load balancing, have high resiliency, and so on. And while everything worked in terms of the dashboards, the thing that didn't synchronize was the named user list, the number of the users of people who are actually using the dashboards. We have fixed that in this version in 4.5. If you happen to be running in high availability, I wasn't in what I was just showing you, but if I'd was running it in high availability, you would see an extra tab, an extra section appear on the maintenance page showing that you're high availability, so showing you the one you're on, but also the other one. And then if you were then to go into the named users section and add an allowed user, for example, or remove one, that would be synchronized between the server you're logging into right now, the SquaredUp that you're logging into right now, and the one running on the other server. So you can see here I've decided to give Fred Flintstone access, and that's been picked up in the other load balanced high availability server. So hopefully for those of you who are running in high availability environments, this will be a welcome improvement, and you won't need to go in and keep your user list synchronized anymore. We'll do that for you. Okay, so that's all the cool new stuff in SquaredUp for SCOM version 4.5. Please stay with me if you're interested to see some of the cool things in the Azure version, and remember that I will talk at the end about how to get this, give you a chance for Q&A, and there was one little bit of news I wanted to share as well. So SquaredUp for Azure version 4.5. So that's the summary of the new features that are in it, but rather than me talk you through them all again, why don't I flip to show you. So if I go over here to this is a SquaredUp version that I installed only yesterday with version 4.5 running on it. So it's pretty much a clean installation. And what you'll see is, we need to log back into it. So authentication happens via my Microsoft account. And you can see, here is, for example, an overview of the subscriptions in the account. You can see similarly resource groups and so on. So that existed in the original version 4.4. What we've added in 4.5, as you drill into these different subscriptions, is the ability to see cost breakdowns as well. So I want to talk about the cost breakdown, cost discovery tiles. So as the default perspective, we've added this beautiful sunburst that shows you the costs of the individual items split by resource group. So each of these middle rings is a resource group. central ring represents the whole subscription, middle ring is a resource group, and then the individual items, individual resources on the edge. So you scaled by size, you can see, for example, this TP SquaredUp is the one that's costing us most, and that's in test person RG resource group. If I drill into the cost perspective, we'll see the other two new visualizations we've added as well. So we've added the ability to also show a trend over time. That's just loading. We'll come back and see that in a second. And then a tree map visualization. So this is another way of looking at a breakdown of costs. So again, this is taking that same subscription, but now showing overall the cost. And then these are proportionate sizes. So this is grouped by resource group. There's virtual machines, RG containers, and so on. And again, you can quickly see at a glance the things that are costing you the most. Let's go back up, and then you'll see there's the 30-day trend. And you can see that actually we might need to worry about that, because we've gone from about a month ago running at £42 a day, we're up to £60 a day on this subscription. So it looks like we need to do a little bit of investigation about what's going on there and who's spending all the money. Okay, I actually want to show you another way of looking at that cost perspective. So this is the cost tiles rather. This is actually a more complete installation where we've built in dashboards to look at particular applications that we're monitoring on Azure Monitor, that we're running in Azure. So we built some application-specific dashboards. Oh dear, looks like the order processing app has crashed out. That's New Relic showing that response time has collapsed, and a number of responses, rather, throughputs have collapsed, and you can see the home page has actually gone dead there. Anyway, these are some applications that we're monitoring. So this is a more sort of rich environment, and we've actually built ourselves here a dashboard that shows how the costs are breaking down across all of those different subscriptions and resource groups. So this is a kind of a richer environment, and I'll use this one to show you how the tile is configured. So you'll see that underneath cost we've offered, so there's cost management, we've offered actually, as well as the scaler, now the line graphs, that's the time series, tree map, and sunburst visualizations. So as before, you can scope it just with all the tiles on different levels. You could look at the cost of a particular tag or set of tags, a type. In this case, we've asked for 4 subscriptions, so the 4 main ones that we're running in this tenant. You can choose time frame, coloring, so you can actually choose to color by different items. In this case, we're coloring it by type. You can change the labeling that appears, and so on. And I'll show you the coloring by type and what that does. So as I hover over it, makes it a bit more obvious. We've colored all the virtual machines in the same shade. So if I pick any particular virtual machine, it'll actually highlight all of the virtual machines across all of the different resource groups. Each of these is a resource group. Similarly, these are, I think, disks. Here is a log analytics workspace and a couple of much smaller ones. So you can see most of our cost is going into that particular workspace, and so on. It's great for very quickly discovering what is going on with your costs. If we similarly add, I'll show you actually how the sunburst works as well. It's also very, very cool. So if we add a sunburst, we scope it on subscription. We'll add a couple of those in. So let's just pick those 2 for now. Let's select a time frame. So we'll use the last. Let's just do the last 7 days and see how it breaks down. And we're done. So what we're showing now is for those 2 subscriptions, how costs break down. So on the right-hand side, we're listing the most expensive ones. You can see where they are. The very central ring represents the subscription. So that's the playground subscription. That's the sandbox subscription. The middle ring, the resource groups again. And then the outer ring, the individual items. So I can quickly see over here, that's that most expensive resource. It's in that core infrastructure resource group, and so on. So again, a lovely way of very quickly discovering where your costs are. Okay, so that's the cost tile. I want to quickly mention it's not necessarily a new feature, but it's something that I want to highlight that you can do with the product, thanks to actually something that Microsoft has added. So when you install a fresh install of version 4.5 for SquaredUp for Azure, we've put, as before, some pre-built dashboards in. We've actually added couple of new ones in. So one of them under monitoring is application insights. And actually, if you go to this dashboard, what it's going to show you is what's going on with the different monitors that you've set up, availability monitors that you've set up in Azure App Insights. And the reason we can do that is because actually they're now exposed, thanks to some recent updates from Microsoft, they're now exposed as metrics via Azure Monitor Metrics. So I'll show you quickly how that works. So this is we've scoped this on type application insights. You could choose to look for a particular resource group and then just choose the app insights within that resource group, and so on. And then you'll see a list of metrics now that are available. So these are standard metrics coming out of Microsoft, receiving response time, browser page load time, a whole bunch of things. So I'll pick availability for this one. You can choose how it's aggregated and so on. And another thing I'll mention, this is a new feature where metrics have what's called dimensions. So, the metric might have extra sort of fields attached to it. You can now split those metrics out. So in the case of availability, for example, each availability test actually has attached to it a test name and a run location. So those are by default aggregated into a total for availability, but you can choose to split out by test name or by run location to see how those are doing. I've got a label on there already. That's great. So what you can see, it's not very exciting, I'm afraid, because my tests are either all running at 100% or they're running at 0%. But if you had some that were doing things more exciting, that would become very immediately visible. You could see if something was dropping out in terms of availability over time. So there's the various different tests you can see. Some of them are split. We've got an outside-in test, for example, on the same availability monitor, a staging and a production, for example. So those are all split out because of that dimensions capability. Okay, so that's a new feature with the dimension splitting, but also a new capability that actually is a result of Microsoft dropping App Insights results into the Azure Monitor metric space so that we can now visualize them with an existing tile. That's pretty cool stuff. I mentioned log analytics. So I've already showed you what's going on in terms of the ability to visualize log analytics in the SCOM product. But I want to show you something that's also quite exciting if you're using Azure in particular, if you're using the Insights plugins. So there's various plugins, VM Insights, Container Insights, and so on within Azure Monitor. Those, again, Microsoft has changed those recently so that it's actually dropping the results of those Insights plugins into Azure logs. And what that means is that we can now use the log visualizations to show the results of those VM Insights. So what VM Insights is basically a client that's based on the SCOM client running inside the VM, inspecting what's going on inside it. And as a result, you can now pull out metrics like things like disk space, memory utilization that were not previously available in the Azure platform. They are logged, and we can use our log visualization to do that. So I'll show you an example of the query that we run to do that. So actually, let's do this one because this is a sort of simple one. So you can scope it down to particular resources if you want. You can choose a time frame. You do need to pick a workspace. So we're now within Azure Monitor. You don't have to set up a provider because, of course, we're in Azure already. This is SquaredUp for Azure. But you do need to select a workspace. And then, again, KQL query. The table is perf. So the perf table is where that VM Insights is putting its results. In this case, we're showing it just for that computer. But if I get rid of that, and hit next, now we'll pull it out for all of the computers that are in that workspace that have VM Insights running in them. And you can see in this case CPU performance, but you could do the same for memory and so on. So lots of different fields within that perf table. Okay, so that's a really nice utilization of the Azure Monitor log visualization that we've added in SquaredUp 4.5. You can do the same thing in the SCOM product if you happen to be using Azure Monitor logs to log data from VM insights. I'm not sure why you'd do that, because you'd probably have the same data in SCOM already, but it's pretty cool if you're using Azure Monitor. All right, alerts. I mentioned alerts, donut and drill downs. So if we have a quick look at this one that I prepared earlier, you can see that I've added a donut showing alerts of all severities in a nice donut tile. You can now click on that and drill down. It's going to show you just those Sev1 alerts. I can click onto any particular alert, and it's going to show me now a new view which shows the structure, so where that alert came from. It came from this particular VM in this case, in this resource group, in this subscription. What changed with it? So it changed from fired to it fired, and then it changed from fired to resolved. So it's actually a resolved alert. There's its state right now. And if you really want to see the full context of the alert, so this was actually on a disk, for example, it's giving you more detail there. So that's alert donut and alert drill down. If I go back actually and show you quickly how that tile is configured. So as before, there is an overall option to show alerts, but now if I click into that, previously we just had list. Now we've added this new donut as well. And as with all the tiles in SquaredUp for Azure, you can scope it on all sorts of things, tags, type, and so on. Select the time frame. You can go in and choose things like you saw that I was actually looking at both acknowledged and newly fired alerts. So I could change that so it's just going to show new alerts and there won't be any. Sorry, there we go. Change it so it's just showing new alerts. Oh, it's got closed in. There we go. And you know, you can change exactly what's shown there. There you go. So you can choose the severity of alerts that are shown. You can choose whether they're fired or resolved, and so on. The next thing that I wanted to show you is a new perf tile that we've added. So this is along with options like bar, line graph, spark lines, and the report tile, we've added this heat map visualization. So as before with the other performance tiles, you select a scope, you have to pick a particular type. So in this case, we've chosen all the VMs in this resource group. Once you've got that type, we show you the list of metrics that are available against it. We've chosen percentage CPU. Again, that dimension splitting, there aren't any dimensions, it happens on this metric, but if there were, we'd show you what they are and you could choose to split. And one thing that we don't often offer within the SquaredUp product, but we do in this case, is you can actually choose the color that's chosen for that heat map. And whichever color you choose, it's going to go on a range from light to dark. So in this case, we've chose it to fit to 0. We can actually fit to the data, so we get a full range. That's the lightest color and that's the darkest color. So you can quickly eyeball which are the ones that are highest in that range. Okay, so that's the heat map tile. And then finally, every dashboard now has this export to Excel feature. That's basically going to let you export the data that's within the particular dashboard you're viewing at the time. Okay, well, that's been a quick run through the new features in SquaredUp for Azure version 4.5. Let's switch back to the PowerPoint to bring this to a close. One final thing that I want to talk about is the installer. So if actually you go to download.squaredup.com, you'll now see that if you pick Azure, there are two ways you can deploy it: Marketplace and an installer that you can download. So that's going to be very useful for organizations that, for example, want to control the way that VMs are set up. They don't want them configured from the Marketplace. They want them domain joined or whatever it might be. That want controls over allocation of public IP. If you go from the Marketplace, we create a public IP. And it also means you can actually install it outside the Azure tenant. So it doesn't matter where it installs as long as it can see the internet. So that would be very useful, for example, if you're a service provider serving multiple end customers with different tenants. So it's also the thing you should use if you are on version 4.4 and you want to upgrade to 4.5. This will allow you to install and maintain all your dashboards. You don't need to do a fresh install and move dashboards over. So you simply remote into the VM, put this installer onto it, run it. We will automatically install your pre-existing installation. So it gives you that in place upgrade. You can, of course, choose to do a brand new install if that's what you want as well. But if we see there's an existing one, we'll default to in-place upgrade. Off you go. It's not quite this quick, but it is pretty quick. And you're into running version 4.5. So that's SquaredUp for Azure version 4.5, SquaredUp for SCOM 4.5. What's happening next? Well, we are going to get back onto the every 2 to 3 month schedule. We have a backlog of things that we're considering. We haven't finalized what's going to go into the next version, but that next version should appear in the next 2 to 3 months. And these are the candidate sort of themes, if you like, that we're considering for adding into this and future releases. But what I would love to hear is your feedback on what you would like us to do next. Either what's the one that's most valuable to you on this list, or what else would you like to see that isn't on this list? So we're looking at things like adding the ability to diagram applications in Azure, like you saw that Vader feature in the SCOM product. We're looking at doing a native integration like we did for ServiceNow, starting to do APM, application performance monitoring tools. Dynatrace is the one that we're considering as the first. We want to do a kind of a general health monitor, that red-green health state that you see in Vader. We want to open that up to other types of monitors. Other third-party tool integrations, so you can pull data from pretty much any third-party tool using our web API tiles already, but we limit the amount of visualization you can do, and you do need to get in and understand the API. So we're looking at bringing more native integrations for other tools, not just Dynatrace, ServiceNow, and so on. Azure DevOps, we've had a fair amount of interest in showing the status of build pipelines and so on for people who are using Azure DevOps. Lighthouse support, so Lighthouse is the ability to see multiple tenants within a single master tenant in Azure. I was actually sneakily using a little bit of that in the demo that I just showed you, but we haven't completed all our testing on that yet, so we haven't declared full support for Azure Lighthouse. That's certainly something that we would like to be able to do. Visualizing app insights beyond what I showed you already. Costs for CSPs, resource counts, so how many of different things have I got, not just the costs, but the counts, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of things that we've sort of built up in the pipeline that we've heard from all of you already, but I'd love to hear from you directly, those of you listening to this call, what you would like to see. So how can you get it? Well, it kind of gave it away a little bit already. The release candidate is available now. For all of those of you watching this webinar, you are the first ones to be offered the release candidate. We haven't told people about it yet. You are the first to know. Download.squaredup.com, though not a great surprise for those of you who've been with us a while. That's where it's available. We will be sending out a release email with a recording of this webinar and how to get hold of the product. It's fully supported in production. So we recommend an in-place upgrade. We're not aware of any breaking changes, so we're very happy to support in-place upgrades. And as always, we will give priority support for anyone using the release candidate, because we are very, very keen to hear about any bugs that may have made it through into this release candidate. It has been thoroughly tested as before, but as always, there could be something that passed us by that we're not aware of, and we're very, very keen to find those as quickly as possible so that we can get to declaring general availability, which we're planning to do in early March, once we've made any necessary bug fixes, if there are any. So that's availability. And I've promised you the last thing, a bit of bonus news. So I mentioned app diagramming as one of the things in our backlog. Well, we've actually built a prototype of doing app diagramming in SquaredUp for Azure already. And you'll see it looks quite similar to Vader. It isn't the same. We can't do automatic discovery. So we're not able from Azure to run the NetStat queries that we use in the SCOM product to actually discover connections at the process level. But what we can do is use the Azure Resource Graph to discover everything of different types within a particular scope, and then drop those into a diagram. You can group them together in different ways, maybe by location, by type, and so on. And then you can drag and drop resources around, show relationships between them by drawing those connectors, and then for particular ones, show actually what's going on in terms of performance and so on. So we haven't just built this prototype, but we'd really like to actually share that with any of you who might be interested in it, anyone who's thinking about moving to Azure or is already in the Azure environment and wants to do that diagramming. If so, please email me and let me know if you're interested in either a demo or in actually getting hold of the prototype software itself, I would really, really like to hear from you. Also, any other feedback and suggestions, for example, those opinions on the backlog that we've got, then please do contact me. I'm actually not going to give you a quick demo now, but I will give anyone who contacts me a demo and let you know how to get hold of the software if you want to play with it. Well, thank you very much for listening. The only thing that remains is to wrap up any questions that may have come up during the call. I know that Adam has been busy answering questions on the chat as we've been going. Adam, are there any other questions that we didn't answer as we were going through?
The first thing is just to mention around licensing. For some of you, this is the first time seeing SquaredUp for Azure. So just to say, as always, the pricing is all available through squaredup.com/pricing. We do offer a hybrid license for SCOM customers, so you can use both products, but they are separate products in effect. The other one, and this is a question for John, is if SCOM product sort of defaults to light mode and Azure defaults to dark, what does open access do, and how do you change that?
Okay, yeah. So open access for the themes. Well, so you can share any dashboard. You can now share the pin perspectives, open access as well. So that non-interactive mode. Right now, though, the way it works in this release candidate is that the open access is shared in the default theme of the product. So the default theme for SquaredUp for SCOM is light theme. So you will see your open access dashboard still in the light theme. I know that will annoy and disappoint some of you, but that is how it works right now. And in the Azure product, the default is dark theme. And again, there may be light theme lovers out there who wish they could show open access in light theme. We are looking at what we can do to make that more flexible as a future release. But for now, that is how it works.
Cool. Yeah, that was it. The rest have all been sort of answered. Like John said, if you have any questions, reach out to him directly. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And with that, we'll end the webinar. And I look forward to hearing from all of you. I'd encourage you all to send me that email. Thank you.